Well, Jack completely forgot all about the treasure. Jack completely forgot all about the treasure until he heard this, ha, 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 I am going to be the richest man in the whole of Scotland tonight. And Jack realised, coming along the path was the old laird. And the old laird had a great bundle on his shoulder, and he saw Jack and he said, what are you doing here, young lad? You should be at home in your bed. Oh, I'm just watching the trees dance. It's great. Have you come to watch the trees dance? I've not come to watch the trees dance, you stupid little boy. I've come to fill up my sacks with treasures from all the hollows in the ground. So you might as well help me. How many are you going to take? Said Jack. The bird said you should just take 2 or 3. 2 or 3? I didn't collect all these sacks for all these years to take 2 or 3 jewels. I'm going to fill each one of my 20 sacks, and I will be the richest man in Scotland, and nobody will outlive me with wealth in my lifetime. And Jack said, oh, please, please, the birds just said take 2 or 3. The birds? The birds? Who listens to the birds anyway? That's a load of nonsense. Come on, Jack. And he grabbed Jack and he pushed him forward into the forest. And Jack tripped and fell as he went over just broken branches from old trees that had died. And then at last he came to the back of the forest where old Crovey would normally have been. And the laird pushed Jack down into the hollow that old Crovey normally occupied. And as Jack fell, he could feel the lumpy bits of all the jewels in his hands because the moon was just a bit behind some clouds there and it wasn't so bright. And the laird threw down the sacks and said, come on, Jack, fill them up. So Jack took 3 jewels and put them into one sack and said, look, laird, the birds promised that would make you rich forever. Well, I don't care what the birds say. And he threw the sack back down. He said, go on, Jack, fill it up, fill it up. So Jack opened the sack again and he took a few jewels. And the laird said, come on, hurry up, hurry up. And Jack said, oh dear, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. But he filled the first sack and the second and the third and the fourth. And suddenly he kind of felt that when he was handing each successive sack to the laird, he seemed to have to stretch up further. And the laird was now leaning over the hole in his belly to get the sack out of Jack's hand. And Jack suddenly put his hands up. And he was much, much deeper in the earth than he had been to begin with. And he could hardly see the speck of the moon in the sky above and only a faint, faint few dots of stars. And he realised that this was exactly what the birds meant, that he would get the punishment of the earth itself by being greedy. And he said, laird, laird, I'm stuck down the hole, I need to get out. Well, come on, Jack, you're far too slow, I'm coming in to help you. And so the laird jumped in the hole and he started greedily taking handfuls of jewels and filling all the sacks. And there were still a couple to go. And Jack faintly heard his voice being called from somewhere way at the top of the hole. Jack, Jack, where are you? The trees are coming back. And he looked up and he said, who's there? Jack, Jack, it's me, it's Mary, your friend. Your mum said you're down the hole and she gave you something to help you get out in case you had trouble. Use it, Jack, use it. And Jack looked up and he couldn't see Mary, but he did recognise her. She was his friend. And he put his hands in his pocket and he found this bundle of knitting. And he thought to himself, how could this save me from down, deep down in this hole? And he said, Mary, Mary, get ready, I'm going to throw it up. Can you catch it? Yes, I'll catch it, Jack, she called back. 1, 2, 3, whoosh! He threw up the bundle of knitting and it didn't come back straight away. So he knew that she must have caught it. And he waited and the laird was now in the second last sack filling up the jewels. And oh, this is great, I'm going to be the richest man in Scotland. And then he heard Mary's voice, Jack, Jack, it's coming, grab it. And he was so far down into the bowels of the earth now that Jack had to lean over the edges, reach into the edges of the hole. And in the dark, he suddenly felt something and he held on and he stood up and he felt it. And he felt something else. And he felt something else. And it all seemed to be connected. What do you think it was? What do you think it was? Anybody? A ladder. A ladder to get him out of the hole. And so Jack held on to it and he said, Laird, Laird, there's a ladder here. We can get out of the hole. Will you come? I'm not coming. You can go if you want. You're scaredy pants, but I'm staying in here until I fill my very last sack. And Jack said, well, I'm going. And he held on to the bottom of the ladder and he leaned down and he picked 3 jewels. He didn't know what they were, but he put them safely and deeply into his pocket. And then he held on to the ladder And he pulled them up and up and up, foot after foot, hand after hand, until at the very top, Mary grabbed him and said, "Come on, Jack, look, old Crovey's nearly here, taking up her place again." Well, Jack and Mary ran back to the mother's house, and Jack's mother received him with a great big hug and said, come in, come on, tell me what happened. I'm so glad Mary came to catch you there, Jack. Are you all right? And I hope you didn't do anything wrong." "Oh no, I didn't, Mum, I didn't, I promise, I'll tell you what happened." And they went into the house, and Jack told his mother everything about the beautiful dancing, but then the worst part of it, about the laird. Because just as they left the forest, they saw old Crovey put her roots down, covering the hole where the laird was still filling his last sack. Well, soon after that, there was somebody came back to the laird's castle. It was his son. He was a young lad, and he'd been away doing the sort of touring abroad that young sons of lairds do, so that they get a bit of education before they inherit their ancestral lands. And the young laird was in every way the opposite of his father. In the way that his father was greedy and mean and unkind and quite horrible to deal with, the young lad was friendly and generous and kind. And the first thing he did was gather everybody around, and he said, "I want to apologise for my father's greed and the way he's kept your houses in such bad condition, kept you all so poor, and I'm going to empty my treasure house and share it all with you equally, and then together we'll build up this estate and make it something that we can all be proud of." And that's what he did. Well, you know, Jack and Mary had been friends since they were kids, and they grew up being friends and carried on being friends with lots of other people in their community, and in the way of things in those days, they got married and they had lots of children, and they carried on staying in that same place because they were happy there. And of course, there was always storytelling in the house, and there was always lots of stories that would be favourite stories. And the story of old Crovey and the dancing trees was the story that was asked for often. Now, when I heard this story from a traditional teller called Stanley Robertson, I was standing in a forest with my back against a lovely old tree, but it was November time. The trees were bare, a bit like they are now, and I knew that there would be no dancing that night. But Stanley told me, that this was old Crovey that I was leaning against. And I thought, really? Old Crovey? Fancy if I came back here on June the 21st every year until I caught the right year of the 50 years. And I said to Stanley, I promise, and I tell you this as well, and I keep my word, if I ever go back to Scotland on midsummer and I go to that forest in Aberdeenshire and I see the trees dancing, I promise I'll only take 2 or 3 jewels, because I wouldn't want to do the wrong thing, and I would want to respect the earth. And that's a story told to me many years ago by the late Stanley Robertson, who heard it from lots of people who'd heard it before, from their grandparents and their uncles and their aunties, in the very forest where it belongs, in Lumphanan in Aberdeenshire.
Incredible. Lovely.
What I do best.
Ah,